from a low budget feature world, I suppose one of the things that is key to it is the type of movie you want to make. And that type of movie sort of frames your expectation. And I want to center this talk a little bit around that, because it's, you know, there's no substitute for the ambition that you will have. So if some of you are coming from shorts and you've made plenty of shorts at this stage, or you've made a few shorts and you want to transition to feature, then this is very specific in terms of thinking about that path. Or if you're like completely ambitious and you want to jump in and make that feature, having not done those, the thing is, it's possible, and the technology has made it possible. So the question is getting everything right before you start that journey. And I think personally that starts with expectation and the type of film that you want to make. You may want to sort of flex your creative muscles in terms of the storytelling and in terms of finding a path to get that story on the screen. It might not suit a short. It's one of the big problems we have with shorts, is that sometimes you try and shoehorn the feature idea into a short. That really doesn't work. I've done that a bit myself as well, where I've purposely made a short and it's been too long and it's not right for that format. And you have to be very cognizant of that. You do not want to be making the long form short when indeed it could actually be a feature. And sometimes it could make complete sense to make the feature out of it. If you look at those films, even if you just go back to the two samples, I'll actually include Broken Law, even though you mightn't have seen it yet. But what's ingrained in those films is a clear understanding from the filmmaker of what mark they wanted to make. And the key to it was that they were able to achieve it based on the budgets. So if you take Pilgrim Hill had a crew of 3, the director, the camera operator, and a person on sound. That was it. It was a crew of 3 for the traditional shoot. But what was the story? The story is very much an examination of a farmer living in isolation. It had elements that felt like documentary, but it was this slow burning story that didn't have, you know, anything that you would expect from traditional narrative storytelling. And so it tapped into something that was quite unique. And that was its selling point. That's what captivated certainly the festival screeners and the people that saw it. And so that was its mark. So first and foremost, the story. You have to be so clear with yourself to ask yourself, does it work as a low budget feature? And that's the first and most important thing that you can do. Broken Law, that is about to come out, is a crime thriller, sort of gangster movie, cops, good and evil, right? And the thing about that, will that work as a low budget? Well, the first thing you can say is yes, it will, because it's modern. So you can literally rock onto streets and start shooting. With the right permits, obviously, but you don't have to create a production design. So there's a thing that will work. Is there a market for it? There most certainly is, because you can say this is like based on cardboard gangsters. We've seen that has happened. Does the story kind of work that you'd be able to do it on a budget? Well, I know it does, because obviously I read the script before they shot it. They shot it in 19 days. And I wouldn't have said to them that you were mad in advance of doing it, because the locations were houses, there were streets, there were cars, there were cop shops, nothing that would have screamed out and said, this isn't possible. So you're looking at all the production values that may be embedded in your story and asking yourself, is this possible? Now, equipment is not a problem. This is the curious thing about it. And, you know, we are of an age, and anybody you listen to any filmmaker in any talk nowadays, and they're asked, what advice would you have for people that want to get into the industry? They'll all say, oh, go make stuff. You know, you should just make stuff. It's the best way to learn. And they're right, because there are no barriers now. We just don't have those barriers. We can shoot on a phone. We've seen people make films. I mean, I don't know if you've watched any of Soderbergh's movies that are on Netflix. He has shot them literally on an iPhone. You know, you can see some production stills from his movies, and you go from these particular types of movies, and he has a tripod, he has an iPhone on the tripod, and there's someone holding a boom. And there ain't nothing else. And he's shooting movies that are ending up on Netflix using this. One of the biggest things that you forget about is what I'm about to put up next. And the reason for this is you just see the end goal in terms of getting to the end of the shoot, and you just want to make your film. And so you will blindly forget about post-production in terms of its budget. I spent twice as much in post-production as I did in production on my low budget feature. Extraordinarily so. If you'd said that to me from the outset, I would have said, ridiculous. I've got Final Cut Pro at home. I could cut most of it if I can't even afford to go anywhere with an editor. I can do all that. And all that was true. But between the grading and the deliverables that were asked for, the sound mixing, the fixing of sound, we didn't have good sound from our shoot, and so much of it had to be recreated. And just the elements that were needed to get to a cinema standard release, and none of the costs we had, be with VFX as well, none of those costs were extraordinary. But because my budget for the shoot was extraordinary, i.e. it shouldn't have been achieved on what we shot it for, the post-production looked ridiculously huge beside it. If you are shooting something and you're getting very excited about it and you want to start showing it to people, or you want to cut a trailer even while you're still shooting, be very careful. You'll get one opportunity sometimes to show it to a funder who may actually want to give you some more money for the project in terms of completion and the completion. And the fact that you're getting that one opportunity, don't waste it. So don't start showing stuff before it's ready, because, you know, we will get excited. And obviously in the age that we live in, you may be sort of keen to want to share stuff online, and that. Just be careful of that until it's ready. And particularly, I know with sales agents, you sometimes get one bite of the cherry. So make sure it's the perfect one when you're doing it. So I would say that you would think like a producer before you start writing the very first elements of a micro budget movie, that you try and figure out, focus out the sort of the ambition to some degree, but that you're writing in the knowledge that you're going to be limited. Now, that in itself can draw out great creative inspiration. I mean, one of the famous stories about Back to the Future, the entire movie had a completely different plot outline for how they were going to travel. It involved a fridge in the desert. It involved a fridge that could travel through time. And they wanted to do this big nuclear sequence, which ultimately kind of ended up in Indiana Jones and the was that last one, the Crystal Skull, right? That sort of part of that storyline. But when they determined they couldn't do it and they were forced to go back and look from a budget point of view, they started looking at the lot, and that brought them to the clock tower in Universal, and the idea came about the lightning, and the idea came about a car, and the whole thing, based on budget constraints, changed the form of what the time machine was going to be. And look at how iconic it is in movie history. Obviously, do your own research in terms of talking to people that have done it before. People can give you tips, will suggest other people to go to. So don't be afraid to reach out to people. The more knowledge you have, the more power you have going into a production, and the pitfalls can potentially be avoided. Even though every production is slightly bit different, you're about to head into something that's, you know, really difficult. So, you know, the knowledge that people can help you with will be very beneficial going into it. Do not be afraid about approaching the agencies. But like I said earlier, have your ballpark, have your figure. Know what you want to do, because they'll shut you down instantly. The best thing is the fast no. You don't want to be waiting. So, you know, if you're going for said actor, that you have this figure in mind, you have a realistic schedule in mind when you want them, make sure that first approach is incredibly professional. It can be really expensive to be putting it into festivals. Again, it's sort of one of those underlying costs that you don't think about. You get it made, and suddenly you start entering it in festivals. There's 30 quid here, 30 quid there, and it really starts to add up. You definitely need a strategy, because it's not going to play in every festival. So you need to be very clear about the type of festival that you will think it works in. Firstly, that's going to save you money. And secondly, you're going to target ones that might be kind of kinder to the genre that you've made it in. So take a look at the programs that they've done. Take a look at the type of films that they've done. Reach out to the programmers as well. Don't just sort of, send it in blankly. Maybe reach out as well. Pushing it can be, obviously you need the momentum of getting into some of them to do it, but don't be afraid to sort of send it to people. Watch loads, because, when you're trying to find the perfect collaborators for your films, I saw stuff at Galway and I come away from watching it and gone, I'd love to work with that DP, or I'd love to work with that composer. I love what they did there. And you don't know where your navigation is going to take you. A project suddenly lands on your desk and you start thinking about it, and you start thinking about the people that you could collaborate with it. And then suddenly that film you saw, 2 years ago, you think, who did that? And you look it up, but just reach out to them. People are very accessible. Just ask them. Good people want to work on good projects. So don't be afraid to reach out to them, to ask them and see. The worst that can happen is they said, no, we're busy at the moment. And seek that advice as well, because it's, people that have been through it will happily, if they're anyways decent, tell you what it's like, and at least maybe save you a small bit of pain going forward with something, which is worthwhile, because you have a lot of mistakes to make when you make those first films. And it's a great way to learn, but it's also, a tough way to learn. But it's the only way to do it, just to get out there and make it.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.